Looking forward to seeing you at work on Monday, sir. Ape Bobby. By the next morning I didn't feel quite so cocky anymore. That might have had something to do with spending the night in a prison cell, or with the fact that I had made a total mess of my plan, or with the fact that I hadn't been able to get myself calmed down enough to sleep until midnight. And when I finally did fall asleep on the hard, uneven bunk bed in the prison cell, I dreamed of a dozen bobbies, reinforced by a whole platoon of ancient Greek statues, chasing me through the dark streets of London all night, shouting, "Stop her. Stop the feminist. She has to be at work on Monday. At 9 sharp. Catch her." I'm not sure which was more disturbing, the horrifying chase or the fact that the stone statues on my tail looked suspiciously like Mr. Rickard Ambrose. I woke sometime around 3 am, my heart hammering so fast I knew I would never be able to go to sleep again. Instead, I surveyed the luxurious hotel suite the nice policemen had put me in for the night, 6 square feet of the best of what London's police stations had to offer. The walls of my temporary home were decorated in an intricate pattern of mold and graffiti. The panorama window, about 2 square feet covered with a beautiful set of iron bars, offered a spectacular view over the gutter of one of London's finest dingy alleyways. The door, of course, was designed to fit the standards of the window and was similarly crafted from highly decorative iron bars. The bed, as my back could attest, was also made to fit the highest standards, and was able to reduce your back muscles to a tangle of aching knots within 5 minutes. All in all, it was a breathtaking place with a charming atmosphere. The previous tenant had even left me a little present in the form of a puddle of well-matured goo in the corner. It emitted the most delicious, stomach-turning odor and completed the whole ambience to misery in perfection. The pale light of the moon which filtered in through the small window didn't make the scene any cheerier. At least there was no one else in the cell with me. The policemen had put me in solitary confinement. I would have liked to think that was for my protection, but truth be told, they probably thought it was safer for the other prisoners. After all, they couldn't want those poor misunderstood thieves, burglars and murderers in the same cell as a raving madwoman who had dressed up as a man and thus had given proof of the fact that she had absolutely no morals whatsoever, could they? Groaning, I shuffled until I was sitting on the bunk, my chin resting in my open palm. A truly philosophical position, ideally suited for pondering my fate. What would be my punishment for my little subterfuge? Would I be sent to prison for daring to defy the laws of England? Or put in the stocks? Or transported to the colonies like a common thief? 3. That last thought cheered me up considerably. I had heard that some of the colonies were much more civilized and advanced when it came to the independence of women than our dear mother country. Plus, my aunt and uncle would then be a few thousand miles away from me. But then I thought of my friends and of my little sister, Ella, and immediately regretted my selfish desire to be shipped off to a criminal colony. I couldn't leave, and even if I could get out of England, I knew I would rather stay and fight for my rights. Running from my problems had never been my style. Grabbing them by the throat and shaking them until they capitulated, that was more my way of dealing with things. Not that this particular strategy had proven very helpful to me recently. After all, I had tried to grab political freedom for women by the throat, and it had just slipped through my fingers. Would it be like that with every other kind of freedom? Yes, it probably would. It wasn't just voting that ladies weren't allowed to do. I was well aware that there were other, even more essential, freedoms. Shifting uncomfortably, I could feel Mr. Ambrose's card pressing against my skin where I had stuffed it into my sleeve to conceal it from the bobby who had taken my personal effects. Yes, a lady definitely lacked certain freedoms, such as the right to work for a living, for instance. You are not seriously thinking about going to his office on Monday morning, are you? I heard a nagging little voice from the back of my mind. Forget it, forget about him, forget he ever existed, or that you met, or that he offered you a job. He won't give it to you now, knowing who you really are. He wouldn't, would he? No, certainly not. Almost certainly. But if there was a chance, even a tiny chance, that he might still hire me, shouldn't I take it? This wasn't just about demonstrating my will to be free to the oppresses of womanhood. This was more serious. Often enough had I wondered about what would happen with me if my uncle, the one who took me and my siblings in after our parents' death, was suddenly to die. Deep inside, I knew the answer. There was no one to take care of us. We would be out on the streets faster than you could say Jack Robinson. We would be reduced to begging or seeking charity. And there were already plenty of people in line for that. What could a young lady like me do, really do, to earn money? Would they even let me enter a factory? There were tens of thousands of working class men, women and children available for those jobs, and I suspected they were 10 times better at spinning and weaving cotton than I would be. For one thing, they'd had a few decades of practice. Besides, these jobs were bone-breaking work for little money. I had taken the time once to calculate whether I could survive on my own out there if I were able to get such a job. A factory worker earned about 1/3d per day. That made about £400 per year, or in other words, £20. 4. The average rent for a nice, comfortable home was about £100. So, if I took up factory work, I would be able to rent 1/5 of a house, provided I managed to live without food, water or clothes for an entire year. I really wasn't that keen on intense fasting or full-time nudity. Sometimes I wondered how those working class people managed to live at all. But I soon stopped wondering, because I had enough problems of my own. Once again I thought of the card in my sleeve. Yes, factory work was out of the question. This kind of work, however, Mr. Ambrose had offered me a job as a private secretary. That was a prestigious post, and well paid. It could be the way to my freedom, the opportunity I had hoped for all my life. What if I just tried to go there and... No. I shook my head, but the card in my sleeve didn't seem to think much of my denial. It pressed into my skin in an ever nastier manner, proving itself to have quite sharp and annoying edges. Well, I looked around. There was nobody here but me. Nobody would see. It couldn't hurt to just take out the card and look at it again, could it? Quickly, I fished it out and held it up into the moonlight filtering in through my panorama gutter window. Rickard Ambrose. Empire House. 322 Leadenhall Street. It still appeared strange to me that it didn't say anything about his titles or occupation, as if the man expected everybody to know who he was. And maybe, just maybe, he might be right to assume so. Leadenhall Street. The name rang a bell somewhere. With sudden realization, my head jerked up from where it rested on my knees and I snapped my fingers. That was it. Wasn't Leadenhall Street in the very heart of the banking district, where all the largest banks and companies, even the East India Company and the Bank of England, had their offices? What was Mr. Rickard Ambrose doing there if, as I had assumed, he was a simple government official? Maybe I had misjudged him. There apparently were a few things hidden under the cold, flinty exterior. What would he say if I took him at his word and on Monday actually? No. Again, I instinctively shook my head, trying to chase the mad thought away. I had to forget about it. It had been a preposterous idea in the first place. He would kick me out of his office as soon as he caught sight of me, or get his goons to do it. Maybe that mountainous fellow Kareem. He looked like he could kick you all the way from here to Hampshire. And that wasn't considering what he could do with that pig sticker of his. And still the possibility was tempting. My eyes glazed over as I considered the possibilities. My own job, my own money, earned with my own hands. Money to do with as I pleased. No longer would I be dependent on my miserly relatives. No longer would I have to dodge my aunt's not so subtle attempts at marrying me off. The mental image of a vulture-like little woman violently cut short my daydream of independence. Ah yes, my beloved aunt, Mrs. Hester Mahadev Rank. Like most greedy people on this wonderful earth, she was most desirous of obtaining what she could not have. First and foremost among those desires was a craving for social status, which her nieces, as daughters of a gentleman, automatically had, and she, as the daughter of a pawnbroker and a lady of questionable honor, was incredibly jealous of. Mrs. Brank was determined, as recompense for all her expense in feeding and clothing us girls for all those years, to squeeze as much social advancement out of us as humanly possible, and would have happily auctioned us off to the highest bidder if by so doing she could have gained an invitation to a duchess's tea party. The sale of relatives, however, unfortunately being illegal in England, she was confined to trying to marry each of us off to as rich and noble a bridegroom as possible, thus killing two birds with one stroke. Not only would she be ridding herself of expensive mouths to feed, but she also would be gaining entrance into higher society through her nephews-in-law. In this way, the 6 bothersome girls who had infested Mrs. Brank's home for years would finally be turned from unremunerative properties into valuable investments. Hitherto, this brilliant scheme had met with little success. All 6 of us were still unmarried, and if I had my way, things were certainly going to stay that way, at least in my own case. My dear aunt, with the natural instinct of the born financier, sensed this reluctance on the part of her property, i.e. me, to be dispensed with at a good profit, and was not very pleased about it. She had pointed out more than once that we would not always be able to count on her and her husband's generosity, and that after the death, nobody would provide for us if we were not married. And what if I want to provide for myself? I had asked her once when the subject had come up. She had stared at me as if I had been speaking a foreign language, and then given me a sour grimace which was probably supposed to have been a smile. She had thought I was joking. Well, here and now was a chance to provide for myself. A real chance. Thoughtfully, I stared at the card again. Money to earn for myself. A way to freedom. If I didn't take it, then it would be the street for me. Or worse, the workhouse. 5. I looked around. Not that I had ever seen a workhouse, myself, but I had heard the stories whispered all around London. This charming little cell might actually give a good indication of what life in such a pigsty of humanity would be like. Criminals and poor people were about the same thing in this glorious metropole, 6, of the British Empire, and their accommodations were probably similar. Of course, as a poor workhouse inmate, I wouldn't have the luxury of a cell to myself, and the food would probably be scarcer, because, unlike criminals, poor people don't generate paperwork when they die of hunger. But it was only to be expected that criminals would get better treatment. After all, thieves and murderers were of some interest to the general public. They were the subject of heroic ballads and gripping newspaper articles. They had to be kept alive until they could be hanged to the cheers of the crowd. Poor people, on the other hand, were just dirty and dull. Who would want to waste food and living space on them? And that was the bright future that awaited me. Unless Mr. Ambrose. Suddenly, I heard a faint noise. Was it really what I thought? Yes, the jingle of keys. Someone was coming. Quickly, I tucked the card away and looked up. Startled by the sudden bright glow, I blinked and shielded my eyes with my hand. I had been so deep in thought that I hadn't noticed how the time had flown by. Now I saw a faint orange glow falling through the window into the cell. The sun was rising. The jingling from outside the cell grew louder and was joined by the sound of heavy footsteps. I watched the cell door apprehensively. After a few more moments, a thick-set bobby appeared from around the corner. I could see him approach through the iron bars of the door. He unlocked it with a rusty key and pulled it open, gesturing for me to exit. What now? I asked, not managing to keep apprehension from creeping into my voice. The portly constable frowned. What do ye mean? What now, miss? What will happen to me? How will I be punished? He blinked like a little piggy. Then, he opened his mouth and started to laugh. He continued to laugh for some time, holding his belly all the while. The keys jingled in the rhythm of his merriment. Oh my God, miss, he gasped, still holding his belly. We ain't gonna punish people for things like that. A woman trying to vote. We might as well punish every nutter running around in the streets, and then we'd be busy till kingdom come. Why, only the other day I met a man in a pub who told me that we're all descendants of apes. 7, clearly off his rocker, the chap. And I didn't even reprimand him. He chuckled once more. Now come on, miss. It's time for ye to go. I'm not going to be thrown into prison, I demanded, actually sounding a little offended. I had expected some horrendous punishment. After all, I had bravely defied the chauvinist establishment. That deserved some recognition, at the very least, didn't it? A few years ago, at the Peterloo massacre, the authorities had come down hard on a crowd of working-class men demonstrating for their right to vote, resulting in 12 dead and 300 injured. And now they were simply going to let me go, just because I was a woman. There was no justice in this world. That's not fair. They're not even going to put me on trial. The Bobby shook his head. Nay, we wouldn't want to bother a judge with this. He'd fine us for wasting his time. Now come on, miss. For a moment, I considered whether I should insist on my right to go to prison. But at heart I was a practical person, and I really didn't want to spend another night on that bunk bed. So, grudgingly, I rose and followed the constable out of the cell to the small office of the police station, which smelled faintly of spit tobacco and bacon. Just wait a moment, miss, while I get your things, the still smiling Bobby said and waddled off to a cupboard in the corner. Opening the cupboard door, he rummaged around inside and came back with something big and black in his hand. There ye go, miss, he said in a stern and annoyingly fatherly manner, handing me all my personal belongings, contained in the top hat I had worn when I first set out on my little adventure. I really hope this will be a lesson to ye. Yes it will, I assured him, adding to myself, too quietly for him to hear, I'll make sure not to curtsy next time. Yes, next time I wouldn't get caught. Next time, I would succeed, because now I knew how hazardous good manners could be. I had never entirely agreed with my aunt, who had always thought them of such great importance, and now I finally knew I had been right all along. They were superfluous and dangerous. They could get you thrown into prison. The Bobby escorted me to the door of the police station, obviously wanting to make sure he would be rid of the madwoman, now that she was out of the cell and could start climbing up the walls or spouting feminist nonsense again at any moment. I was more than happy to oblige him and stepped out of the brick building into a glorious Saturday morning. The sun was shining and the fog was only slight today, the wind blowing in the opposite direction from the River Thames, making the morning air comparatively clear by London standards. I immediately set out towards home. I wasn't sure what my aunt had made of my overnight absence. She might not even have noticed it. With 6 of us in the house, and 90% of her brain cells occupied with saving housekeeping money, she sometimes forgot one or another of her nieces. Sometimes I got lucky and it was my turn. Maybe, if I was really lucky, that had been the case last night. At least I knew she hadn't completely run haywire and contacted the police, fearing I had been abducted or some such nonsense. If she had, the police would have informed her that her dear niece was perfectly safe, though a bit bedraggled and sitting, dressed in men's clothes, in one of their cells. If she had heard that, my aunt would have come to get me. And I don't know whether I would have survived the encounter. As it was, I had hopes of escaping relatively unscathed. As if in answer to my hopeful attitude, the rows of dark houses parted before me and granted me a beautiful view of Green Park. In the warm glow of the sunrise, the small park looked like a fairy kingdom planted between the strict, orderly houses of middle-class London. A few birds were hopping on the grass, and the wind rippled the surface of a little pond surrounded by wildflowers. Through a clump of trees on the opposite side of the park, I could see the houses of St. James's Street. My Uncle Bufford had lived on St. James's Street ever since I could remember, and we had lived with him and his wife ever since I could walk. We, that is my 5 sisters and I, had to quit our family's country estate years ago, after our mother and father died and the estate went to the next male heir of the line. If you believed the stories of my older siblings, who could still remember the place, it had been a veritable palace with hundreds of servants and doorknobs made of gold. I didn't believe their stories, I mean. But I did somewhat resent the thing about this supposedly rightful heir, snatching away our family's estate just because he was a dratted man. Oh well, to tell the truth, I didn't remember our childhood home in the country well, and I didn't want to. I was a city girl, and the few trees and lawns of Green Park were as much country as I could deal with at any given time. Squaring my shoulders, I made my way through the park, enjoying the songs of the birds in the trees and the fresh morning breeze. The country was a nice thing, as long as it was in the middle of town and you could reach a civilized place with shops, libraries and newspapers within 5 minutes or so. 5 minutes and 37 seconds later, I had reached the wall that encircled our little garden, a rare thing in the city of London. Over the wall, I could see the plain, orderly brick house with its plain, orderly windows, plain, orderly curtains and plain, orderly smoke curling out the chimney in a discreet and economical manner. The flower beds around the house were well kept, but strict and simple. Everything was rectangular and neat. There wasn't a piece of decoration in sight. Sometimes, when I looked at this house I had been living in for years now, I thought it should have a sign over the door saying, Fortress of the bourgeoisie, center of the realm of hard work and stinginess. Beware of the aunt, she bites. There was only one bright spot among all the neat tediousness, the window of a first-floor room. It afforded a wonderful view over Green Park, which was why, when we had arrived at this house years ago, the room had been dusty and unused, and my uncle had never set foot in it. He had probably been afraid the annoyingly beautiful view might distract him, or worse, tempt him to actually take a walk and thus waste valuable time he otherwise could have spent working. But that had been just fine with me. When we had arrived at my uncle's, I had seen the dusty, deserted old room, fallen in love with it and taken possession before any of my sisters could complain. I had defended my conquest with my very life. Only Ella, my youngest sister, and of all of them the one I could stomach best, had been allowed to enter my dominion and make her abode there along with me. Right now, the fact that my room looked out over the back garden came in handy in a way which had nothing whatsoever to do with the beautiful view. Hurrying across the street, I opened the little door in the garden wall with the key I had secretly borrowed from my uncle, along with his clothes and passport. Inside, I quickly made my way to the garden shed. Taking out the rickety old ladder that had been in there since time immemorial, I carefully put it to the wall of the house and started climbing up to the window which I had taken care to leave unlatched. If I was lucky, I would get back into the house without anybody being the wiser. Climbing up the ladder proved to be considerably more difficult than climbing down had been. My muscles were aching from the night in the cell, and there seemed to be several large lead weights tied to my behind, pulling me down. Or maybe it was just my behind that felt so heavy. No, it was just generous, after all, not fat. Definitely not fat. Sweat ran down my face in rivulets by the time I had reached the top of the ladder. I clung to the windowsill for a moment, making sure my aching legs would be up for the task, then I hoisted myself inside and landed rather inelegantly on the floor. Done. I was back home, and nobody had seen me sneak in. I remained kneeling on the floor for a moment longer to catch my breath, and then turned and got up, to find my sister Ella sitting just a few feet away on her bed, staring at me, her mouth agape in shock. Oh, did I happen to mention she hadn't known anything of my leaving yesterday? Blast, blast, blast. Who he really is. Where have you been? Ella demanded in a breathless voice, jumping up from the bed, where, judging from the dampness of her pillows, she had spent half the night crying in despair. Oh Lily, I've been so worried. She definitely looked worried. Her normally cream-colored face had taken on the hue of a freshly whitewashed wall, except for her large almond eyes, which were shining with suppressed anguish. With both hands, she held a handkerchief to her mouth as if to stifle a scream that was on the tip of her tongue. Glittering tears decorated her face like diamonds. I had to hand it to her. She looked like a perfect damsel in distress. And it hadn't even been she who had spent the night in prison. How did she do it? What has happened to you, Lily? Were you abducted? Who were you with? Where were you? And why are you wearing Uncle Bufford's old striped trousers? At the last question, she actually stopped crying. Apparently, my wearing striped trousers had a calming effect on her. I should try to do it more often. Don't worry, I told her, patting her on the head. I'm perfectly fine. Yes, but where were you? She repeated the question with more force. I shrugged. Out. Where? Somewhere in town. You've been gone the whole night. Have I? I tried to sound surprised. It didn't sound very convincing, unfortunately. My, how time flies. Why are you wearing Uncle Bufford's trousers? She asked again. Apparently, this point was of extraordinary significance to her. Well, desperately I racked my brain for some legitimate reason why a girl should be wandering through London dressed in trousers. Instinctively, my eyes slid up and down Ella's figure. She was dressed in what was considered normal and decent for a young lady to wear, a pale cotton gown with wide, puffed sleeves and lace trimmings, and, of course, the crinoline, a structure for supporting enormous hoop skirts that was made out of the bones of whales. The poor sea creatures had to suffer to give the rear end of every lady within the British Empire preposterous dimensions. This was what was considered normal. Taking this into consideration, was there a legitimate reason why a woman would want to wear trousers? Well, maybe because she actually had some brains. Why don't you answer, Lily? What is the matter? But no, that wouldn't work as an argument with Ella. I bit my lip, trying desperately to think of something to say. Please, she pleaded, clasping her hands together like a little child. Please tell me where you were. Darn it, how could I resist her? But I simply couldn't tell her what had really happened. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't that I didn't trust her. I loved her. I would have trusted her with my deepest, darkest secrets, if she hadn't been afraid of the dark, that is. If I told her that I went out, dressed in men's clothes, to illegally vote at a parliamentary election, was offered a job as a secretary, got caught by the police, then got thrown into jail and spent the night next door to 3 famous murderers, she would have nightmares for the next 3 years. I wanted to go out last night to visit Patsy, I fibbed. And you know, it was so late, and the streets were so dark. I was afraid something might happen to me, a lone girl, in the dangerous city. I affected a quite convincing shudder, and I had read in some book, I don't remember the title right now, of girls dressing up as men when they did not want to be harassed, so I thought why not do the same, and so I did. But then it was so terrible out in the dark streets, and Patsy said I could stay the night if I didn't want to return in the dark. I was afraid, so I stayed. Sorry for worrying you. I waited for the admonishment. No doubt even my sweet, unsuspecting sister would see through this feeble lie. When in the world had I ever been afraid of anything, let alone something as ridiculous as the dark? Rather than dressing in my uncle's clothes to avoid trouble, I would have taken my uncle's cane to deal with trouble if it chose to appear. What would I say next if Ella didn't believe me? Oh, my poor Lily. Ella rushed towards me. The next thing I knew she was hugging me tightly, though slightly awkwardly because of her enormous hoop skirt getting in the way. That must have been so terrible. You must have been really frightened. Yes, I mumbled. I was really. Dear Lord, she had actually swallowed it. Poor Lily, you were so brave. Oh, I would have died from fear if I had to set a foot outside the house at night. Well, it's fortunate that I went out then, and not you, I said, patting her head reassuringly. I like you alive and kicking. We must go to Aunt Brank, Lily, immediately, Ella insisted, stood back and grasped me by the hand. She wanted to know where you had disappeared to. I'm sure she's frantic with worry. Oh blast, Ella, the sweet little angel, might be easy to fool, but my aunt was another matter. If she saw me in striped trousers it would most definitely not have a calming effect on her. Quite the opposite, I suspected. Ella was already turning and starting towards the door when I grasped her by the arm. Stop, wait. Why, we shouldn't wait. She must be terribly worried. Worried, not worried for me, that was for sure. Worried that I had committed some humongous, scandalous transgression, maybe. That was always her first assumption when anything out of the ordinary happened near me. Blame Lily. And in this case she would actually be right. I can't let her see me like this. I gestured at Uncle Bufford's old trousers. She would be very upset. To be honest, very upset, was putting it mildly, but I thought it better to couch it in gentler terms for the benefit of my little sister. Ella clutched her hands in front of her chest. Oh, you are right. Oh, Lily, what shall we do? Change, I suggested. At least I should. You are fine as you are. Quite right. A beaming smile spread across Ella's face. And then we will go down to see Aunt. Yes. Quickly I went to the big old wardrobe that took up a considerable portion of the room. Its size was hardly justified by its contents. 1 coat and 2 dresses for each of us. No ball gowns, no large collection of dresses like many of the ladies in town possessed. Originally, there had even been only 1 dress for each of us, until I had pointed out to my dear aunt and uncle that if 1 dress got dirty, you needed a second one to change into, since it was hardly proper for a lady to run around stark naked. Grudgingly, my uncle had conceded the point and opened his precious purse to buy each of us another dress. The plainest and cheapest that could be found in the city of London. This was the dress I now took out of the wardrobe, not forgetting to thank the Lord for my uncle's stinginess. The very fact that it was so plain made it a marvelous camouflage for dodging the prospective suitors my aunt flung at me at regular intervals. Here, hold this for a moment, will you? I asked Ella, with one hand starting to open the belt which held Uncle Bufford's old trousers in place, and handing her my favorite armor against suitors with the other. You aren't likely to need it to fend off many suitors, though, are you? Said a nasty little voice in the back of my head. Not as long as you look so unlike a girl that the most masculine of men doesn't even recognize you as female. Help me put this on, will you? I said to Ella, to drown out the annoying voice in my head. I would not think of Mr. Ambrose again. I had done more than enough of that in prison. Of course, she responded with a sweet smile and was just about to unbutton the dress when a knock from the door froze her in place. That knock managed to drive all thoughts of Mr. Ambrose out of my head far more successfully than any attempts on my part. Ella, are you still in there? Who are you talking to? The high tones of my aunt's voice penetrated the door. I would have said her voice sounded something like a piece of chalk being dragged across a blackboard, but that would be an insult to chalk all over the world. Before I could stop her, Ella smiled and cried, elated, "It's Lily, Aunt. She has come back." There was a pause. It was filled with the threat of sudden and violent doom. "Lillian, is it true? Are you in there?" For a moment I considered shouting back, "No, not really," but then I gave up. There was no sense in pretending any more. "Yes, Aunt, I am here. Come out at once. I wish to speak with you. You have a lot to explain, young lady." On tiptoes, I went to the door and bolted it. "What are you doing?" Ella mouthed at me, her eyes wide. Protecting our necks, I mouthed back at her. "I'm sorry, Aunt, but that will have to wait a while," I called out. "I'm dressing at the moment." "So what? I am your aunt. I have seen you dress since you were a little girl." She turned the doorknob and pushed, but the door wouldn't budge. Lillian, don't tell me this door is bolted." "That's fine," I answered in as light a tone as I could manage while frantically unbuttoning Uncle Bufford's waistcoat. "I won't tell you, I promise." "Don't get smart with me, young lady. Is this door bolted? You just asked me not to tell you that. So I can't, even though technically it actually might be true." "Lillian. Oh, maybe I shouldn't push her too far." "Yes, Aunt, it is bolted." "Then unbolt and open it at once." "Sorry, I can't do that." Quickly, I ripped the waistcoat off and stuffed it under my pillow. Now I was standing half naked in my room, dressed only in striped trousers, a corset and a top hat which for some reason hadn't fallen off my head yet. I am preparing a special look for myself today. You always say how I don't look ladylike enough, don't you? Well, I'm giving it a special effort today, and I want to surprise you. Is that really true? Yes. I glanced down at my corset and striped trousers. You wouldn't believe how I look right now. It's so different from the usual. Trust me, I want to know where you were last night. I'll tell you as soon as I'm finished dressing. That would give me a little more time to prepare a convincing variation of the lie I had told Ella. Were you with a man? I rolled my eyes. Of course that would be the first conclusion my aunt would come to. Will he make an honest woman of you? She demanded. No, I hissed. All this talk was distracting. Angrily, I fumbled at a waistcoat button which wouldn't do what I wanted. I needed to get these clothes off fast. What kind of rake have you gotten yourself mixed up with? I didn't mean no as in, no he won't make an honest woman of me. I meant no as in, no, I wasn't with a man. Oh, she pondered that for a moment, and then demanded, well, where were you, then? Quickly I looked around for a place to hide the top hat. There wasn't any place I could see, so I just chucked it out of the open window. I would get it later when all the hubbub was over. Like I said, Aunt, I'll tell you when I'm finished preparing my special look. What kind of special look? What exactly is it that you are doing in there? Ella will tell you. I'm too busy with dressing. I climbed out of the trousers and stuffed them inside my second dress in the wardrobe. When I turned to her, Ella was gaping at me in horror. What am I supposed to tell her? She mouthed. Think of something. I mouthed back and then transferred my attention to the dress I would have to worm myself into. Handing it to me, Ella hurried to the door. Aunt, well, Lily is. Furiously I tried to struggle into the crinoline while Ella stood at the door and with a quivering voice told my aunt some nonsense story about how I was doing my hair in a special new style. God, couldn't she think of a good lie for once? It would be a special day when I decided to style my hair at all, let alone in some special way. My brown locks always looked as if a hurricane had just gone through them in any case, so why bother? But amazingly, my aunt seemed to swallow the story. She stopped trying to come in, and, after a time, went off grumbling. 5 minutes later I was completely dressed, styled and mentally prepared. Ella had even lavished her skills on me and provided me with a hasty yet luscious hairdo, to give at least a little bit of credence to her story. She squeezed my hand in silent encouragement. Finally, I took a deep breath, unbolted the door, plastered a bright smile on my face and stepped out into enemy territory. My aunt was waiting for me on the landing, her thin arms folded in front of her chest, the glare of her narrow eyes directed at me like that of the ancient Roman god Jupiter at some poor wrongdoer he was just about to smite with a thunderbolt. All she was missing was the toga and the long white beard. Where were you? She demanded, the beady little eyes in her vulture-like face narrowing with suspicion. And be warned, I will brook no evasions this time. Oh, me, I said brightly. I was at Patsy's and stayed the night. Just came back, in fact. Don't you remember? I told you the day before yesterday that I would stay at her place. Keep it simple. Don't say anything else. Just keep it simple and for God's sake, don't blink. My aunt's glower flickered. I waited, holding my breath. I had gambled on her nature. My dear aunt was suspicious to the bone, but she also didn't actually care tuppence about how I spent my time, as long as it didn't threaten her social standing or the contents of her purse. If I had gotten myself killed last night, she wouldn't have cared, if I had done it in a nice, quiet manner. I saw the suspicion gradually lift from her bony face to be replaced by her usual expression of mild distaste. Yes, now that you mention it, I do recall something of the kind, she said slowly. The day before yesterday, you say? Exactly, I confirmed, letting my smile grow even more bright and confident. Where did you think I was? Did you think I spent the night in prison? Her mouth thinned. Lillian, don't even joke about such a thing. It is unbecoming of a lady. Of course, I am sorry. Behind me, I heard Ella carefully step out of the room. She had obviously listened and knew that the danger of actual bloodshed was past. Shall we go down to breakfast? I suggested. I am hungry after my walk. Nodding, and still frowning slightly, my aunt turned and led the way down the stairs. Behind her, I let out a deep breath. Thank the Lord for uncaring relatives. Asterisk tilde asterisk tilde asterisk asterisk tilde asterisk tilde asterisk. Breakfast, the most important meal of the day, it is said, and, in many families under the glorious rule of Her Majesty Queen Victoria, an occasion for the entire household to gather around the table and make polite small talk about their plans for the day, while consuming luscious delicacies. I had read once, when for some reason I had peeked into a cookbook, that in the usual upper middle class family, the following was brought to the table, for one breakfast. Fresh sausages. Boiled eggs. A cold ham. Porridge with fresh cream and butter. Kippers. A pheasant pie. Fresh curds and whey. Corn muffins. Fresh bread. Marmalade. Honey. Coffee. Tea. The cookbook had also suggested that a red and white checkered tablecloth should be avoided since it could have adverse effects on the digestion. Breakfast at my uncle's house was slightly different. For one thing, my dear Uncle Brank only owned one tablecloth, a dark brown one, so stains would not be visible and it wouldn't have to be washed so often. For another, the meal was not quite so opulent, and as for the polite small talk at table, that was inhibited slightly by the fact that my uncle wasn't actually present. Mr. Brank had not come down into the dining room to take his meals for years, not since his sister and her husband had died, leaving him the task of looking after 6 of these strange, unpleasant little creatures commonly referred to as girls. Mr. Brank was not fond of female company. He'd had to acquire a wife at some point in his life, of course, in order to produce an offspring who could someday take over the business, but at least she was a sensible, economical woman. These girls were another matter entirely. Thus it was that when we arrived in the dining room that morning, the big chair at the head of the table was empty, and my aunt bore an especially sour expression on her thin face. Leadfield, our only servant, who held the position of butler, valet, scullion and shoeblack all at the same time, was waiting for us and bowed as far as his ancient back would allow. Breakfast is served, madam. Thank you, Leadfield, my aunt said in a cool voice, repeating the ritual that had taken place in our household for over a decade. With another bow and a sweep of his bony arm, Leadfield directed us to the table. Will Mr. Brank be joining us at the breakfast table today, Leadfield? My aunt asked, continuing the ritual. The master is very busy and left early for work this morning, Leadfield gave the expected answer. I brought him his breakfast earlier, up in his study. I see. I saw my aunt throw a piercing glower up at the door of Uncle Brank's study, just visible upstairs. It had long been his inner sanctum and impenetrable fortress, where no female, not even my aunt, was allowed to enter. When Mr. Brank's sister and her husband, my beloved mother and father, had been so inconsiderate as to die in an accident, and this horde of chattering miniature females had invaded his home, Mr. Brank had wisely decided to retreat and establish a secure base in his upstairs study, where these small creatures would not dare to venture. Instead of coming down to breakfast, lunch and dinner, he preferred to have his meals brought up to him by the aged butler, or to simply eat at work. Needless to say that this did not endear us girls to his wife, who lost many an opportunity to discuss at the table with her husband such important subjects as her latest efforts in household savings and the profligacy of the neighbors. This time, things were no different. My aunt pursed her lips as the other doors to the dining room opened and my other sisters filed in from various parts of the house, yet my uncle remained absent. Are you sure he is already gone, Leadfield? Yes, madam. She sniffed. Well, hopefully he will join us tomorrow. Hopefully, madam, Leadfield concurred. You may serve the first course. The first and only, I thought, shaking my head. Yes, madam. Thank you, madam. With all the dignity of a host of royal lackeys serving a voluptuous feast, Leadfield took the lid off the porcelain bowl in the middle of the table and poured each of us a healthy portion of porridge. To this he added some potatoes and salted herrings, the cheapest and most nourishing food that could be found on the London market. Say what you will, my uncle didn't starve us. Over the years, I even had gotten quite a taste for salted herrings. My aunt obviously didn't feel like that. She eyed the fish on her plate with ambivalence. I could clearly see 2 of her strongest instincts warring with one another, her stinginess, which told her that this was the cheapest food you could get without poisoning yourself, and her social aspirations, which told her that a lady would under no circumstances eat something that also formed the regular diet of Irish peasants. In the end, stinginess, aided by a rumbling stomach, seemed to win out. She poked one of the potatoes with her fork as if she expected it to come alive and attack her. When it didn't, she impaled it and picked up her knife. I had already started shoveling porridge into my mouth while my aunt was occupied, taking the opportunity to actually get some serious eating done before my lack of table manners was noticed. Beside me, Ella ate with considerably better manners but equal enjoyment. Gertrude, my eldest sister and the old maid in the family, didn't seem to mind the plain food either. The others, however, Lisbeth and especially the twins, Anne and Maria, looked rather contemptuously at their plates and took a long time to start eating. Even when they finally stuck their forks into the herring, they did not eat very much, and this was not just the case because they didn't like their food. Unlike me, they considered themselves to be very fine ladies. Very fine ladies could under no circumstances talk with their mouths full, which meant they hardly ever could put a bite in their mouths. Have you heard? Anne burst out as soon as we were all seated. Lord Tilsworth is engaged. And to a frightful girl, too. She is supposed to be one of the most low-minded creatures in London, and with horrible freckles all over her face. What in God's name induced him to marry her I cannot imagine. She's not even of the gentry, from what my friend Grace told me the other day. No, gasped Maria. Can it be true that he is throwing himself away on somebody like that? I can hardly believe it. It is true, I swear it. As I said, I had it from Grace, who had it from Beatrice, who had it from Sarah, who had it from her second cousin, who heard it all from the cousin of Lord Tilsworth's second chambermaid. Which of course means that it must be true, I mumbled, rolling my eyes and chewing my potatoes. Lillian, snapped my beloved aunt, don't talk with your mouth full. Yes, aunt. Such a pity, Maria sighed. Tilsworth would have been such a catch, and he was quite taken with me at the last ball. I rolled my eyes again and hoped my aunt wouldn't see. She would probably consider that unladylike behavior, too. Oh yes, the last ball. Anne and Maria had been talking about it for days and days now. They were the only ones of us who actually ever got invited to any balls, because they were the only ones pretty enough in the eyes of the gentlemen. No, that wasn't quite true. Ella could have given them a run for their money, if she hadn't been so painfully shy. But as it was, Anne and Maria, pale, tall and sickly looking, with dark circles under their eyes and that demure look the gentleman favored so much, were the only ones of us ever getting into society. Which was pretty much how I liked it. They were welcome to all the balls and all the men they could get. They could have thousands and thousands of men, and have illicit affairs with them or marry one or all of them, or cook them for dinner if they really wanted to. I would wish them the best of luck. But why oh why did they have to bore the rest of us to death by talking about it? And the Earl of Farthingham is supposed to be engaged to Lady Melrose. Really, Anne, I hadn't heard that. Yes, Maria, you see, it's a frightful secret because I ignored them to the best of my ability and concentrated on my salted herrings, while they kept gossiping about the famous Admiral this and the rich Mr. that. My thoughts were neither on my food nor on society, however. They were on a certain tall, dark-eyed individual and on one question that kept coming back to the forefront of my mind ever since he had given me his card: should I go there? I didn't even know why I was still thinking about it. A normal lady wouldn't even consider trying to get a job. Ah yes, that snarky little voice in the back of my mind said, but then, a normal lady wouldn't try to go voting dressed up as a man, would she? Ladies simply weren't supposed to be independent. They were expected to marry, sit at home and look pretty. And that's not exactly what you have in mind for your life, is it? I threw a glance at Anne and Maria. They obviously were content with this lot in life. And why not? They were pretty, they could sit still very well, and to judge from the effort which they put into their social exploits, they would marry well, too. The young men of London were, from what I could gather, full of praise for their beauty and accomplishments, and were only quarreling about which of the two to praise more. Quite a hard decision, since they were twins and identical to the last lock of the golden hair. Indeed, Anne and Maria would make very fine ladies. I, on the other hand, had always had a rather stormy temperament that didn't lend itself well to the idea of marriage. Not as long as the vows included an oath of obedience to a man, anyway. I definitely wanted to do more with my life than exist as an appendix to some chauvinist blockhead. So why did I hesitate, now that this golden opportunity had presented itself? Maybe because I remembered with crystal-like clarity the darkness in Mr. Ambrose's eyes. I remembered how that muscled mountain, Kareem, had dragged off the fat man at his master's command. Mr. Ambrose was no friendly or gentle man. There was a good chance that going there would cost me dearly. Still, his offer was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Now the question was, for this opportunity, was I prepared to enter the lion's den without knowing if an open maw awaited me? In my mind, I again saw an image of his dark eyes so deep you could drown in them. They seemed to draw me towards them. Suddenly, I didn't feel as hesitant about going as I had a moment ago. His offer, I reminded myself. That is the only reason you're thinking about him, the only reason for going to see him again. This man is your ticket to freedom. Remember that, and while you're at it, forget about his hard, chiseled face and those deep, dark eyes. But somehow I couldn't seem to manage. His eyes seemed to stare at me constantly out of my memory, burning holes into my mind. In those eyes I saw ruthlessness, arrogance, anger and more icy cold than in an Arctic blizzard. Why couldn't I stop thinking about them? About him. I had never thought much about a man before. The way they behaved themselves, regardless of their looks, had always been enough to make me want to give them a good kick in the backside. But there was something about Mr. Ambrose, something about those dark sea-colored eyes, his granite face and the way he held himself, ramrod straight and immovable, which I couldn't get out of my head. I had a feeling that if I tried to kick him, I would end up breaking every single one of my toes. I wanted to go to him, to grab this golden opportunity, and at the same time I wanted nothing so much as to run away to hide in some corner where his dark eyes couldn't find me. If I only knew more about him, knew who or what he was and what I would be facing, maybe I could work up the courage to go to his office. But how in the world could I find out anything about him? And Sir Raleigh was so taken with the French countess, I doubt he'll be able to resist another week. If he doesn't propose soon, I know nothing about London society. And I'm an expert, trust me. It's a marvel that. My hand froze in midair, half a herring hanging from my fork. Anne's words, which I had only heard by accident, had struck me like a thunderbolt. I'm an expert, trust me. That was it. I just might find out more about him simply by asking. After all, I had a veritable fountain of information about London's society at my disposal. 2 of them, in fact, or even 3 if you counted my aunt, who, although she wasn't able to go out as much as Anne and Maria, was just as addicted to the gossip of the high society. And to the high society, I was sure by now in spite of his simple attire, Mr. Ambrose belonged without a doubt. It was still unlikely that they would know of him. There were thousands of upper-class people residing in London, the capital of the world. But asking couldn't hurt. I have a question, I said, laying down my fork and bisected herring.